To get things rolling, uh, this is a session that is a project of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. If you don't know that, that's a monthly environmental scan I publish. It goes out by email, and in that, I identify trends from the previous month. And these occur in the areas of education and technology, educational technology, policy, demographics, culture, and all kinds of areas. This has been going on for several years, so I've been able to longitudinally identify trends that are especially significant or not doing so well, and we can track that over time. It's a free report, although you're welcome to contribute to it. So you can go to ftte.us and find out more, including previous examples. Now, I just want to thank two different groups who are making the Future Trends Forum possible. First is NiserNet from New York State. This is a wonderful IT and education group that have been very generous in their support, and we thank them. And then also, more visibly, is Shindig. Shindig provides support in two different levels. One of them is the level of technology. As you can see here, they're making this platform available for us, so we're thankful. But at the same time, they have a team of people who work very, very hard making it all work. Everything from making sure the system functions to helping individual guests and myself answer questions with technology. So we're really, really thankful for that. Now, we're getting our guest ready, who seems to be having some issue with audio, but let me introduce him first. If you don't know Scott, I'm sure you know his work, because Scott is one of the founders and the current editor of Inside Higher Ed, one of the two leading journals discovering and exploring what's going on in the world of higher education. IHE is a very open access publication. It's all free to anyone who can participate. In full disclosure, I've been written about there and I've written there. So I think it's a very, very powerful journal. I'm proud to participate in, and I'm delighted to have Scott involved. So why don't we take my slide off of the screen and bring Scott up on stage?
Hi, Brian.
Scott,
Great to
can you
be
hear
here.
us?
I can.
Excellent. Excellent. Where are you today?
I am in my office in Washington, D.C.
Oh, excellent, excellent. People in the chat box think that it's probably warm down there.
And they're correct.
Oh. Well, take care of yourself. Your tie is already very warm. I hope you don't overheat. Um, we will we will think cool yet energetic thoughts for you.
Excellent.
Uh, so Scott, let me just ask, just to get the ball rolling. And folks, Scott and I have a lot to talk about. We have all kinds of issues and ideas. But let me ask you, please, any questions you want to ask Scott, based on his wonderful perspective of being the leader of Inside Higher Ed, please put them in the chat box or type the ask button, or if you want to come on stage, click the raise hand button or put it on Twitter. We're eager to hear from you. And I have several questions drawn from other people. And the first one I have to ask is, how does Inside Higher Ed do it? How do you guys sustain yourselves and do all this great journalism? What's your business model? I mean, you're not like the Chronicle with a gatekeeper
No,
fund. How do
we
you
are
work?
we are anti-paywall, and that is a matter of journalism and philosophy and business. So all of
Ah,
our content is totally free, and we support ourselves with advertising and other services. So you can find thousands of great jobs in higher education on our site, and colleges and other employers pay to have them there. You can also find you'll see ads from publishers, from technology companies, from finance companies that want to reach people in academia. So
ah,
we are advertising support, and the reason we believe in that model as opposed to a paywall model is I believe good journalism requires everyone to be able to read and react to what you write. Um, Higher education is not like some other parts of society where all the important ideas maybe come from those at the top of some imaginary hierarchy. I believe that
mhm.
grad students have as much to contribute as presidents. Grad students don't have expense accounts, and we want them reading. Does that give you some sense?
It gives me a terrific sense. I'm sure you've answered that question several hundred times, but I
Yes.
appreciate you delivering it with such passion and such well-honed precision. Um, and I, just so you know, it chimes in with quite a few themes that have emerged since February. on the Future
Hmm.
Trends Forum, including the power of open, but also this kind of growth, widening of access and participation. I love your phrase. I just tweeted it that grad students have as much to contribute as presidents. Um, I think you should be flying a big red flag on the front page of Inside Higher Ed.
Say that, and
Um,
it's not just. I mean, I described it in terms of job titles, but it's equally important in terms of institutions. A
mm,
lot of great ideas come out of, say, the Boston, Massachusetts area, but I think important ideas emanate from Bunker Hill Community College, not just Harvard and MIT. And if you go with a paywall perspective, you're basically saying we will primarily serve those from certain kinds of institutions and certain kinds of job titles. That's not our approach.
Fascinating. And personally, I'm very sympathetic to it. In fact, right now, in the very, I'm not making this up, in the very next tab over from this tab, I have today's column from Matt Reed, your Confessions of a Community College Dean. I think that's a great example of this kind of egalitarianism of institutions. And apparently, it seems to be working out.
Yes, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people assume that from a business perspective, you can only make money if you're serving the elites. But that's really not true. I also think it's very important if you think, say, about graduate education. Today's PhD students, even at elite research universities, are very unlikely to make their careers at elite research universities. So it's really important that we create a community where people can learn from one another and react to one another, regardless of where they are in the so-called hierarchy.
Well, I think one of our firsts, Richard DeMello, I think would definitely agree with you. And I know you've written about his work.
Yeah.
Um, well, again, I hate to lead with that question, but people ask me about it, and I'm fascinated myself. Um, so let's turn from your wonderful platform to the question of ideas, and they ask, from your perch, being able to see so much of higher education, what do you think are the leading forces, the most powerful trends that are likely to transform higher ed in the next 5 to 10 years? What are you seeing
Sure.
for that?
So this may come from the fact that, you heard me a minute ago. I care a lot about equity issues. I am very worried that a trend that is not positive is a increasing gap between have and have not in higher education. I think that it is becoming harder and harder for certain kinds of institutions to either thrive or get the resources that they need to deliver a high quality higher education. And I
What
worry
kind?
that our society almost doesn't care. This is part of why I worry about focusing on just the elites. If you look in the last month, 3 small private colleges closed. I think you're going to see more of that on the small private side. On the large public side, leaving aside our flagship universities, I worry about more and more institutions being told to educate more students without appropriate resources. So I see a big set of economic challenges for higher education. Then, certainly apropos of a lot of the work that you do, there's no doubt that we're in a technology ongoing revolution in higher education. And that is part of a process of delivering higher education in new ways. So you see, I mean, it was interesting to me that earlier this week, Hillary Clinton, who is not considered a cheerleader for the reform movement in higher education, coming out and saying she wants billions in Pell Grants to go to non-traditional forms of delivery. I think the fact that she identified that issue, which probably may not have come to as naturally to her as, say, Barack Obama, says
Hmm,
something that people are looking at what's going on and saying, time for new ways. Now, that leads to the third issue I would raise, and there are many, which would be as we explore new forms of delivering higher education, what are the quality control mechanisms that will work? It's very easy to bash accrediting, say, as a not the ideal tool, and I would agree with much of that criticism. But if you look at, sorry to go there, but Trump University, I think
it's
there
okay.
is plenty of evidence that you need some quality control or people may get ripped off. So, how you promote innovation and quality control without stifling non-traditional approaches, I see as another key issue. I'm happy to talk
That's a,
more about those, or I can give you other trends, wherever you want to go.
well, these three are enormous, Scott, and let me just press in each one of them if I could.
Sure,
To go back, let's go back to the economics and equity one first. I
sure.
think it's pretty well established that American states have been reducing the amount of money they contribute to public institutions on a per student basis, and that's been going on for about a generation. So, and I'm seeing very few countervailing forces for that, and I think that's a pretty clear explanation. What is it that's making it so hard for private institutions to survive? I mean, why are we seeing so many stories like Sweetbriar? Why are we seeing so many stories about these privates that are, in my terms, making queen sacrifices, shedding faculty as they see enrollments drop? What's making that happen?
Well, see, what people need to remember is that if you look at private higher education, people think of the elites, which are significantly supported by endowments. Most private colleges, while they have endowments, their endowment income is a rounding error in their budget. The key thing
Yes.
is how many students they recruit and retain from year to year. Then you have the fact that their tuition rates are above what most families would consider paying. Then you throw in the student loan crisis and the tougher economy. So students are still willing to borrow a lot, but only if they feel they have a good chance of employment after graduation. If students start to feel they can't get a good job or repay loans, they're less likely to borrow. Then you have a lot of private colleges basically in a competition to offer the deepest discounts. And so we see private colleges. I had a private college president in here a few weeks ago with a 70+% discount rate. That means
Wow.
70% off sticker price is what most people are getting. That is unsustainable at most institutions. Now, if you have billions in your endowment, that's fine, but most of these places don't. And so people don't realize that most private colleges aren't that wealthy.
So it's really that it sounds to me in part a question of perception that families are afraid that a low or medium or even a lower higher tier private, it looks very expensive. They're afraid because of the tuition dollars being that high. They don't necessarily follow the discount rate. They're afraid of what this means for debt, and so they stay away. Um, that sounds like a pretty
And then there
powerful explanation.
And there are other issues as well. Many of the small privates are historically or still are liberal arts colleges. I think
Hmm.
liberal arts education is hugely important, is a great thing, and is largely misunderstood. But these
Hmm.
days, many students and their families worry about a liberal arts education. Now, most of the research shows that smart employers aren't focused on what your major was, in fact, value many of the things associated with liberal arts education. But I think some of my colleagues in the press do a terrible job on this issue. And you read story after story about, a barista who got a philosophy degree, and people get nervous.
Yes.
Likewise, people don't understand that it's not either or. It's not that if you study literature, you can't learn how to run a business as well. There's
Great.
a lot of false dichotomies out there.
Yeah, for me, literature PhD, I run a business, so I guess I'm a poster child.
You are.
Uh, yeah, this chimes in very well with a previous guest, Bob Archibald, who I think you know at William Mary, who argues that this is really a perception issue. That there are a lot of people who aren't IHE, who are writing very bad coverage. The barista who has $100,000 in loans and is working at Starbucks seems to be the archetype of this now. Um, do you think these two trends happening to publics and privates? Do you see any way those will turn around in the next 5 or 10 years, or do you think these dual shrinkages, these parallel shrinkages, will just continue?
Well, one of the interesting public policy questions right now relates to the proposal of Hillary Clinton, and also Bernie Sanders had a similar proposal to change the financing of public higher education. They would put billions into the states to provide to public universities that agree to make higher education debt free in the case of the Clinton plan, free in the case of the Bernie Sanders plan. Now, that may or may not happen. It may or may not be a good idea. What I find notable about it is that the trend that you referenced, that states have walked away from their responsibility to public higher education, I see these plans as in many ways the first serious response to saying we need another way. Um, for whatever reason, the states have walked away and they're not coming back. While you see, say, in California, a lot of excitement over the fact that under Jerry Brown, appropriations for higher education have increased. Yet, if you look at the levels of public higher education in California, they're not back to where they were in 2008, and they've got a lot more students. So even when you have governors try to address it, I don't think they really are.
Well, I wonder if demographics are going to make this especially hard. So many states are seeing a decline in traditional age students, and I wonder if that's not going to just keep accelerating that. But we have a question. Let me just bring up this question here, which is a more pungent question than mine. This comes from my friend Ted Newcomb, who should be in Arizona today, and he wants to know. Given this, what's the advantage of holding on to the current bricks and mortar models rather than just, letting them fail? Should we experience, if I can paraphrase Ted, why not shift to wholly online or why not somebody let these guys close?
I don't think it's a disaster if some institutions close. I don't operate under that assumption. On the other hand, when I look at much of the evidence about online education, in many ways, I think it is best educationally for the most advantaged students in our society. If MIT and Stanford announced next week that they were replacing one of the 4 years of an undergraduate education with an all online program, I actually think their students would do just fine. I think the
Yeah.
evidence is much more mixed about the non-traditional student, the first generation student, the minority student who went to lousy high schools, about whether they will
Hmm.
succeed in all online environments. What I worry about the most is that the cuts are hurting the institutions that are serving those students. In time, I suspect there will be great online offerings for all kinds of students. Right now, I worry about that. The other important thing to remember is it's not just the instruction itself, but if you're talking about first generation students, low income students, academic advising, more important than for other segments of society, tutoring, more important, tech support, more important. Um, all of those things are easy for an advantaged student, less so for others. So I worry about the just assume online will fix it.
Well, let's take this. That's a great answer, and let's take this towards the technology a little further. Um, you said that one of the big trends is the desire for using technology as a new way to deliver teaching and learning. We have a question about how that works from Bob Isaacson. Bob wants to know, with the rise of cloud computing, what is the future role of central IT?
By central, do you mean at the institutional level?
I'm going to say, Bob could say something in chat or back to us, but I'm going to guess yes.
So cloud computing certainly is taking off and is, if not the norm, probably, in my opinion, headed to being the norm. I think what you need to me, the interesting thing about institutional level IT is the melding, or sometimes not melding, of the technology issues and the academic issues. And I think if I look at higher education leadership today, at the beginning, I think, at the beginning of the tech, of the rise of tech, I think it was seen as a support service, much like utilities might be viewed as a support service. And I don't mean that, and I think that's a very inadequate way to view it, but I think that's the way it was viewed. Increasingly, I see tech including academic leadership. And it's not a case of just the academic leaders saying, this is what we need, can you provide it? But actually mixing the tech perspective and the academic perspective. And that's whether you're talking about online education, technology tools in the classroom, any other things. That to me is the central challenge. Are you really combining those effectively? And then beyond the big tech and I guess finance and academic leadership, it's rank and file faculty. Are they being fully engaged and involved? I fear at too many campuses, there is a group of faculty who are totally invested and bought in, and there are some faculty who may be hostile. And then there's a middle group of faculty who, given a helping hand, would use technology more, but too often they're ignored. So I see a huge agenda for goes well beyond, are we putting our stuff in the cloud?
Oh, that's a terrific answer. Bob, I hope this is giving you a good food for thought. It seems like, on the one hand, what you're saying is that we may outsource IT, back-end support, say, but we shouldn't be outsourcing academic computing. Perhaps central IT is going to shift less and less towards classic IT and more towards educational technology and academic computing. But I love the way that you combine that with the importance of faculty engagement, where the faculty have to be supported. Now, it can include classic IT as well as the academic. Um, uh, Ted had a question about this. Ted, can you come up on stage? You had a really good question. I think it'd be better if you could unfold it in person. Well, we'll wait till he's ready to do that, because it's a pretty rich question. Um, I think if you while Ted's thinking about this, or while he's making sure that everything is put up in place, we have another question. Not sure who this is from, but let me read it here. Once badging has crossed a certain threshold, do you imagine that the challenges for bricks and mortar institutions will escalate?
It depends in part on whether the brick and mortar institutions embrace badging. And it's important, if you look at badging, if you look at competency-based education, other reform models, many of them are offered both by online institutions and bricks and mortar institutions. So I would divide the two. The other thing that is unclear to me about badging is whether badging will be degrees plus badging or replace degrees. Right now, despite all the enthusiasm about badging, I still see people valuing degrees. And I see them valuing badging as a way to say, in addition to whatever my bachelor's or master's degree is, I have this defined skill set. I don't feel we are yet at the place where people will say, I have 5 badges but no degree. Now, we might get there, but I don't think we're there yet. And despite all the enthusiasm for new forms of education, I think many of the leaders of American society value traditional prestige degrees. If I can give you an example of something I said recently that people found amusing, Inside Higher Ed did not cover when Malia Obama enrolled at Harvard or decided to go to Harvard. What I told my colleagues here is, had Malia enrolled at SNHU, we would have been all over it as a huge story. But the reality is, even President Obama, a champion of non-traditional forms of education, and a champion of less expensive forms of education, is going to shell out $65,000 a year for his daughter to go to a very traditional college. And I think when badges will really threaten bricks and mortar is when Sasha Obama gets 5 badges and skips a bachelor's degree. And I'm not going to hold my breath on that one.
That's a great anecdote. That's a great story. Um, I'm going to copy that and use that shamelessly. Um, speaking of which, let's bring in Ted. Ted's question, while he's coming up on stage, let me just start to was about what happens to professional educators and their future and development. So, Ted, why don't you go on, take my place, and um, put your question to Scott. We have speaking of technology through other doing teaching through other means. We have a great question from Scott Robeson, and this is I got to say, this is one that we've been wrestling with here at the Future Trends Forum for a while. He wants to know what the impact will be of open education resources over the next 3 to 5 years.
I personally think OER is poised to really take off. If you talk to students, parents, and policymakers about their pain points with regard to paying for higher education, um, paying for textbooks comes up almost more than it should given the relative share of the cost. For community college students, of course, textbooks can be a very large percentage, but even at wealthy people who attend expensive private universities where textbooks are a smaller share, people are rebelling against it. So part of it is cost. The other thing is that I hear more and more faculty members who are going with mix and match approaches. So they don't want one textbook. They want to curate material. And many
Hmm.
find OER easier to curate than they find, say, a traditional, I'm buying this textbook or that textbook. And so I think people are using it educationally. The thing that has held it back, which I think is changing, has changed dramatically in the last few years, is the vetting. While many faculty members viewed the publishers as the source of quality control, I know that this is a good book because it went through a process from such and such a publisher. Very true.
Right, right.
To the extent new systems are coming around, some sponsored by publishers, some by OER advocates, that do the vetting, I think that is key, and I think it's going to take off.
That would make a huge, huge difference. And then that may be one that's susceptible to inertia, where the more vetting leads to more usage, the more usage means more people are talking about it, sharing it, these look more vetted, that leads to more usage, and so on. Um,
Well, the other thing
that's
is younger faculty members want this for both educational and financial reasons. Young faculty members seem to take their students' cost issues very seriously, and they're challenging. We wrote about a fascinating dispute at one of the Cal State campuses where they have a rule that all people who teach the same section must use the same textbook. One of the faculty members rebelled and wanted to use OER, part to save money, in part to because he thought the material was actually better. Big fight going on, and one of the things that this relates to is if you look at OER and textbook issues, there is some question of who makes the choice. And traditionally, this has been an area, textbook choice has been very much the domain of the faculty, at least aside from adjunct faculty
right.
who frequently have the choices imposed upon them. Some OER advocates are pushing for things that might limit the faculty control. So these things have a range of interconnected issues, but I see OER growing.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. And I really like the description of the mechanism by which it can grow. I have one question. And this is Keith. Um, Keith, can you come up on stage? Take my place here so you can start your question.
Hey, Brian, it's Keitha. I don't know why it's saying Keith. But hey, Sky, how are you doing? Thank you so much for the
Good, and I
questions. I'm
can hear
loving the
you. Great to talk to
responses.
you.
So here's one. You can? Okay, great, great. Okay, here's mine. I want to be like a little bit controversial. So I'm a learning designer and I work at an academic institution, and I kind of bleed in between, the corporate. I kind of bleed everywhere because I believe in learning, however learn, whatever tool we use and whatever methodology. So where do you see design, and how can it help when it comes to teaching online? Like, what are the trends that you see? Because I'm hearing all these
So
things like MIT saying learning architect, people coming with learner experience, these bleeding edges. So I would love to hear your thoughts.
it's a great question. I'm not going to be controversial with you because I think your field is going to grow and is incredibly important and hasn't always been valued as it should be. Look, I see learning designers or whatever you call them, different campuses call them different things. But in the same way that, say, a librarian I view librarians as a key part to any
I
higher
love it.
education and to teaching and learning. I view instructional designers as sort of another generation of librarians, although I want to quickly say I don't believe librarians can or should go away. But in the same way that librarians bring a skill set that a faculty member doesn't have, to help the faculty member and the students learn, do research, use tools effectively, I see the learning designer doing that more and more. There are faculty comfort levels with creating courses online or creating in-class, in-person online tools vary widely. From the person who's been doing this from a very young age to the person who never imagined doing it. I think smart colleges and universities are hiring you and people like you to work with faculty wherever they're at. And because that's saying, I think some faculty may think they're more skilled at course design than they are, even if they have the technology. And so they need your help. And then there are faculty maybe who just never imagined teaching in a way any other than the lecture, who need a lot of help of different sorts. And I think just as a skilled librarian teaches the faculty members so much without dictating what the faculty members teach, so too do I see a skilled instructional designer offering so much. And this is, I talked at the beginning about have not institutions. To me, this is also a real important issue. How many community colleges have enough instructional designers that their faculty need compared to elite institutions? We write about this a lot through our blogger, Josh Kim, who's very much part of this movement. And so I'm so glad you're here. So glad you're doing the great work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that was first. Thank you for a really good question and for a very positive answer. Um, I'm really struck by the idea of librarians and instructional designers complementing each other. Um, we almost had Seth Goodman up here because he wanted to pass on a compliment to you, Scott. He said, I just wanted to say that I routinely listen to the IHE Weekly podcast and it is outstanding, often covering topics that are off my radar. Highly recommended. So
Well, thank you.
now, I'd like the two of us to climb off the stage, though. This is the time in the Future Trends Forum where we mingle, where
Okay.
we enter the crowd and people get to talk with each other. So imagine we're in a conference hall and we literally climb off the stage and everyone, there's a hubbub of conversation and people are asking questions and talking with each other. So first, the format for doing this, if you do not want to talk to anybody else, that's fine. Go over to your cursor, to your icon, mouse over it. There should be a little padlock. Click that so you can control who gets to talk to you and you can just say, no, I'm busy. It could be because you're eating food right now or that you're shy or your camera doesn't work. That's fine. But if you'd like to talk to us, if you'd like to talk to other people, please climb into groups of 2 or 3. I think that you have this as your charge. This is what you're thinking about. Scott Jaschik has just identified a couple of major trends for shaping education in the near future. I'd like you to think about which of these trends you see as influencing your own particular institution, if you're at a college, university, library, museum. So again, think about this sense of technology being used to find out new ways of delivering education. Are you seeing that? Or are you seeing that economic equity gap? Is that appearing in your institution? So think about those, take 5 minutes to talk about it, and we'll come back. So, Shindig folks, if you could kick Scott and I off, we're going to mingle. Well, I always find it a delight to get a chance to get off the stage and talk to people on a one-to-one, one-to-two basis. I really feel it's nice to see the ideas that we've talked about in person. Scott, what did you find in your trawl through our audience?
Lots of good ideas. I wonder if there are any more questions based on the discussions.
Well, we had quite a few actually, and let me just I'll mention one from Andy F, which wasn't a question; it was a statement. This came up in the chat while we were talking. He said, without design, we'll have huge trouble in the transition to a new educational system in the US. Designers will be the bridge between today's teachers and authors to tomorrow's curriculum. So I thought it was a nice
I
spin
agree.
on what you and were talking about. Uh, and then we grabbed Ted Newcomb. We got him, got his mic working, and he had a question, which I'm afraid is a personal question from me. He said there seem to be two blends of professionals, folks like Brian on their own tracks, and those within bricks and mortar. How should they adapt to these new features of education?
Um, well, it seems to me we need to get out of either or thinking.
Hmm,
Now, we need people in traditional institutions thinking about both how can we use technology, but also what are lessons from non-traditional forms that can be applied. So, for instance, if you look at at a very simple level, the success of online education in moving beyond just having fall and spring start to courses. That is something that should not be unique to online education. If you look at the success, I've said many times, I think the biggest success of for-profit higher education, or one of its biggest successes, is they believe that students should find a place to park. What would be wrong with traditional institutions serving adult students doing that?
absolutely.
Many non-traditional institutions, I think, pay much more attention to pedagogy than traditional institutions. And traditional
Well,
institutions, I worry that many times people are just like, well, it feels right to do it this way. So there's lots to be learned back and forth.
well, thank you. It's a really nice synthesis of the question. Um, we have a related question, which comes from Vicky Romano on Twitter. I'm not sure if she's actually able to be in the session right now, but she's more comfortable with Twitter, and so I'm happy to see it. She asks, what trends can we have in faculty development to support first generation students and student support systems? So, how
Um,
do we develop faculty to respond to these new students?
I think what you actually need is a radical reform of graduate education first, and then maybe go on from there. But the reality is and some of this is going on, but PhD education has traditionally been designed with the understanding that they were training people to work at PhD institutions serving traditional students. So first, as we're educating the future faculty, there should be much more of an emphasis on teaching generally, but then specifically on teaching the diverse ranges of students who are in different kinds of institutions. You can be a brilliant new PhD who is totally clueless on teaching at a community college or an urban public university or any other or an online institution. So we need to start teaching different techniques. Then for those who are already in their faculty careers, we need to be providing more. I think one of the great ironies about higher education, despite being in the education space, and despite the fact that colleges do so much in continuing education for professionals in other fields, is how limited the offerings are for people in higher education. So I think much more needs to be done.
Hmm.
The assumption that just because somebody has a doctorate or has been teaching knows how to teach a particular cohort of students just isn't true.
Do you think digital humanities is one way we're seeing more options open up within traditional
Oh,
education?
absolutely. I mean, one problem with digital humanities is I fear that people say that phrase and they mean 100 different things, but most of those things are growing and are good opportunities. And it's a good example of my earlier point that it's not an either or. Digital humanities people are historians and literary scholars and philosophers, but they are using technology in various ways in their research and teaching. And I think the excitement over the digital humanities is really encouraging.
No, I agree. I agree. Um, Let me take you back to your third big trend that you raised, which was the need for developing quality control mechanisms. And you gave a cartoonish but real example of Trump University. Um, what do you see happening? Do you think the Department of Education is going to continue to war against accreditors and press them on this? Do you think we'll see new accreditors appear or new forms? What do you think?
I would not be surprised if we see new forms over time. There are lots of things about our traditional accrediting system that show how it was designed for an earlier era. Just take the fact that regional accreditation assumes that a college in New England is inherently different from a college in California, even though you have institutions like Middlebury with a main campus in Vermont and a campus in California. And I'm not sure that the values are that different. You have online institutions offering education all over. So a lot of what was designed was for traditional in-person education. And then when you're looking at a boot camp or a certificate program or a badge, I am not certain that many have given enough thought to how to evaluate them. And I'm not sure that brand new institutions, say just offering badging or boot camps, are ready to go through a multi-year accreditation review to even get initial accreditation, and yet who's looking at them? The thing that is striking about Trump University and also some very high quality new providers is that by not seeking federal aid, they sort of take themselves out of a lot of the quality control system. And that may be a good thing if they're a high quality system, they're a high quality offering. But again, our assumption is most quality control comes through the desire to get federal aid. Not everyone wants federal aid.
Especially given the possibility of strings attached.
Absolutely. Now, the one problem is that it's everyone seems to agree with the flaws of accreditation. Very few people seem to agree on what a better system would be, and that's perhaps why we still have the current system. And there are a lot of people, very smart, thoughtful people working within the accreditation system.
Right, right. I mean, it's a really arcane and often invisible and not well rewarded system. So it's some heroic people, but as you say, they may be working the structure that's 30 years out of date. Um, we have another question, and this comes from Shelley Alcorn, who asks, how can we help bridge the ed to employment gap?
So I would say we need to do a number of things. One is and there's a difference here, I'd say, between clearly pre-professional programs and more general programs that are preparing students for a variety of careers. So I would divide it in two, probably could divide it into 10, but for today, so if it's a specific career-related program, it seems to me you need to look at things like connections between the educational program and people who are doing hiring, state licensure authorities, various groups that have opinions on what a graduate should know. Now, the more difficult question is if, say, you're looking at a liberal arts college, and there I would start to look at things like, are students, whatever they're studying, getting basic literacy skills, numeracy skills? Can they write an effective, not just an effective term paper, but an effective one-pager summarizing an argument? Can they give oral presentations well? Can they use Excel to create a spreadsheet for something? Do they work well in teams? Do they understand something of the world? These are not things that are traditionally on a transcript. And so you have to ask, does the college provide these experiences in a coherent way so that you can feel comfortable that graduates of these institutions have these skills? Again, I think too much emphasis now on the major as opposed to real critical thinking and other skills combined with practical skills and, of course, internships.
Shelley, that's a giant answer. I hope that's a useful one for you. Um, we have time for one more question, and this comes from Bob. And Bob asks a pretty, a classic, he asks a question about a classic metaphor, really. He wants to know, how can university curriculum be changed to break down the silos that have become obsolete for the workforce? Powerful question.
A very important question. And the problem is, which silos do you want to break down? It's very popular in some circles to say, well, we should make everything interdisciplinary. But I've had a lot of people, even real strong advocates of interdisciplinary education, say that the best interdisciplinary education comes from people who know a discipline or two. So I'm not sure it's a matter of tearing down the silos, more of making sure they all have open doors. And I think you do need to look at the role of general education. We've been running a series of stories about colleges rethinking general education and not just viewing it as a check mark of things. I think you need to encourage more relationships between different departments so that courses may build on one another even as they go across certain disciplinary barriers. The other thing is you have to look at the reward structure, and this relates to several of the issues we've talked about today. It's great for administrators to say our faculty members should use technology more, but I ask them, are you rewarding it? In many colleges and universities, the way you get the key reward, tenure, is to have a disciplinary focus. When colleges and universities are tenuring people for their interdisciplinary work, I think you'll see a big change. I know a lot of younger faculty members who explicitly focus on the discipline until they get tenure. I think that's unfortunate that they feel that interdisciplinary work could count against them. But they're also not wrong to have that fear.
That's very practical. Um, I do have one great fear right now, Scott, which is that we are out of time. Um, we've been going at top speed with so many great questions. I want to thank everybody who raised so many questions. Those of you who came on stage and those of you who wrote them in text. I thank you for a really generous conversation from you guys. And then let me thank you, Scott. I mean, you are a reporter's dream, unsurprisingly. You have pithy, rapid answers to great questions. I mean, I've been typing really quickly, and it's just a delight. I want to have you come back so we can follow up on some of these topics. You're just a real pleasure to have on the program.
Well, I'd be delighted to come back. Thank you to those who are here today for great questions. And please feel free to reach out anytime. Always happy to talk about these great issues.
Excellent. You've seen there have been some tweets aimed at you, so you'll already see some of those when you move away from the camera.
Great.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Let me bring you down for the final slide I need to have up here. So this is the end of the session, and this is the part where we talk about our next session. And I have a bit of a surprise announcement. Next week, there is no Future Trends Forum. The reason being, it is not just a U.S. holiday, but also my 23rd wedding anniversary. So my wife and I are going to take some time off, being offline and relaxing. So we may show pictures from that. But the week after that, we will have Brad Wheeler from the CIO of Indiana University. And we are really, really looking forward to Brad. He is one of the leading CIOs in American higher education, bar none. He's also the leader of the really interesting Unison project, and we want the chance to talk to him and figure out where that's going. So we'll shift to the CIO perspective. Now, for the past couple of weeks, I've barraged you with questions about your feedback for the Future Trends Forum, and we've gotten great survey responses. So I'll be blogging about that and then saying a little bit about it at the next program. In the meantime, if you'd like to learn more about it, here are two great links. One to Future Trends Technology and Education Group, one to shindig.com. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for coming. Bye.